My name is Blake Proberts. I'm the CEO and founder over here at Acorn. I know a lot of you, but this room gets bigger and bigger every year. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the product and what we're doing on the AI front and how we're linking AI sort of into some outcomes and some of the features we've built and we're looking to build. We have undertaken a lot of research, analysis, surveys, and spent a lot of time with customers to really understand and try and get out, like, why do people actually do corporate learning? Like, what's the reason that they do corporate learning? And really it comes down to one of two things. They generally want to improve in their existing role, or they want to progress into a new role, or completely change careers in general. And it's a really simplistic thing, but it's really been lost probably over the past few years. And it was massively highlighted for me a couple of weeks ago. We were at DevLearn, so we had a 12-hour team in DevLearn, which I believe is the biggest L&D conference in the world in North America. So it was in Vegas, and one of the largest talk tracks aside from AI was probably ROI and how we actually display that as L&D practitioners. Like, what do we do to take out and say, hey, I ran this course, I ran this program, what was the outcome and what changed? And to date, the majority of the things that vendors have been able to supply and systems show are things around completions and maybe satisfaction, but what they're really not getting to is the heart of, was there a tangible uplift in the capability of the individual after doing that training? And if individuals believe that, they tend to do a lot more of the content as well. And so what we did was we ran a survey. We surveyed 1,500 organizations of 5,000 plus people across North America. So we engaged a third-party firm out of Silicon Valley to do that for us. And we found a lot of really interesting tidbits. I've got a QR code to this report at the end of this as well. So you guys can all download it. And I'm only going to go through some of the high level of it, but we're going to dig in a little bit more. So 1 in 3 organizations feel that their participation is low, and it's a top concern within their LMS ecosystem. The majority of people don't engage with those platforms. And the solution to that traditionally has felt as, let's just push like more onto people. And how do we have more content that should drive more engagement? That's actually causing the problem, funnily enough. And overwhelmingly, most organizations are not able to show a tangible ROI or uplift in capability. What they're able to show are things like how many completions people did, which when looking at that from an organizational layer, it's kind of like, so what? Unfortunately, I know you're all L&D people and maybe you're hating me right now, but that's how I feel. So the biggest thing is that, like, it doesn't just waste the time of the individual. It actually erodes their trust and confidence in L&D programs going forwards and the HR ecosystem in general. Because what we find is when a user goes into a system and they look for content, they generally look about 4 times for content. If they're unable to find that content upon enrolling, starting content 4 times, they generally never come back except for one reason. Does anybody reckon they can tell me what the reason is? Because they have to. Thank you. Compliance. And so what ends up happening is the L&D systems become compliance systems, and everybody hates it because it's, welcome to your new job. You're super excited. Here's a cybersecurity module on not to plug your USB into the wrong thing, which is important, don't get me wrong, but it's probably not the most engaging of things for people. And so to show this and evidence of this, what we did was we actually pulled data from our own system. We pulled data from other third-party systems during that survey. And what we see across those 1,500 organizations is that 52% of users only log in 1 month per year. So half of the organization log in once, and then essentially they don't come back on average across those organizations. So that's a really big sample size that we're able to get the data for. The company we use is called Baba. They're really awesome at this. And that was something that really stuck out to us. And you can generally see exactly when the mandatory training peaks and troughs because of the usage within the application, which we found a little bit disheartening. So what we did was we sort of looked at, and you've probably heard me talk about this a little bit last year, and I'll talk about sort of what we've done in the product to enable this. But when we look at our customers with capability frameworks and our customers without capability frameworks, or our customers that are linking their completions, whether it's in Acorn or outside of Acorn, to their performance outcomes, and they're changing that performance discussion from a once a year, sort of a 9-box grid, something along those lines. They're changing that conversation into more of a development conversation. What we see is the average amount of completions per individual within the organization goes up to 77 from 6.8. So there's a really tangible increase, and what we believe that to be attributed to is that it's very clear if somebody has a discussion around their capability and they have a clear development plan, what is actually relevant to them. What becomes really awesome is after the fact, we can also then look backwards and we can say, hey, the people who have a tangible and a fast or a quick uplift in capability, what are they doing? And we can start to see those patterns. So instead of sending you to a catalog, what we want to send you to is a development plan. I actually want to delete the catalog within Acorn, but I think a lot of you would be very sad if we did, and we forced you down that pathway. But truly, if users go through a development process, the uptake and the satisfaction in the system is way, way higher. And essentially that just gives them role goal clarity. You might have seen that on sort of our website or some of our material, but what we're trying to essentially establish is what is someone's role, what is the goal of the roles, and that provides that individual with clarity. When they have that clarity, they're able to find what's relevant to them in terms of learning opportunities for an organization. So that sounds all like great and dandy and theoretically fantastic, right? But then you're like, well, we've probably tried to do that, or we have done that in the past, and it's really, really tricky to do. We discovered the same thing. We actually took a year off onboarding new clients and completely re-engineered our capability stack within the product. And over the past year, it's led us to where we are today. And so some of the things that we're able to do, in particular with the rise of LLMs and AI and large learning models and language models, is we're able to now start to take those frameworks and empower the individual teams to actually be able to do that mapping exercise for them. So what we've tried to do with all of our feature sets, and in particular AI, is we don't want to just like slap a chatbot on. We don't want to just like take it and say like, we've got AI powered, whatever. What we want to do is we actually want to take the outcome you're looking for, and we're trying to map that to a tangible outcome and take that forward. And one of the best use cases we've found is, let's take what an organization already has and let's leverage that process in a more efficient or a different way. And everybody has job descriptions. They tend to all have them because they've hired people for a role. And so what we're able to do is we're able to take multiple job descriptions that you already have, and we're able to upload those into the system, and then we're able to map those job frameworks to an existing capability framework that you have, and cohorts. So not only are we able to map the JDs to a capability framework, we're able to create and suggest cohorts based on the user fields that you have within your application. So the AI will actually read those user fields and then create those cohorts, and then provide you with an example cohort. It'll finalize those, and then it will provide you with example capabilities from your existing framework and give you the ability to send that out to the individual teams, which we find is where we get the biggest uptake of a framework. So instead of sort of having this thing be pushed down into the different teams within the organization, what we say is we want a collaborative approach. We're not the experts in like infrastructure engineering, and particular Canberra connects is pretty much all government, Nelly. There's a few non-government, but a lot of government people. Government has specific use cases that only exist because it's government. You know, if you're at the Department of Agriculture, or if you're at the Security Investment Commission, you do something that literally nobody else does. And so because of that, it's quite unique. And so what we need to do is we need to get the subject matter experts involved in that, and then we need to give them the ability to tailor that and make that work for those individual teams. Once they become believers in that, then their teams will flow through. So we come from like a top-down approach. And it looks exactly like this. We essentially give people the ability to review that, and we give people the ability to jump in and essentially edit their capabilities and their frameworks, but also the different levels and proficiencies within that. So as HR, what we do is we give them a framework, and we say, hey, at this organization, we want beginner, intermediate, advanced, super proficient. And that's going to be the framework for proficiency that we have here. So we're aligned across that. But we need you to tell us, like, what does a beginner look like in this role? What is an intermediate person looking like in this role? And once we've created that process for them, essentially they're able to then roll that out. The system's able to map that, review your content, and map content assets directly to those capabilities as well. So then what we have is the ability to essentially roll out development plans for every individual on their first day. So that's our first step. And then what our second step becomes is, okay, that's great. We have a mapping exercise in place. What do we sort of do now? Like, everybody's mapped, but we don't know where they are. So what we do is we ask people to go through a reflection exercise and review themselves as an individual. And in that reflection exercise, we're actually able to embed AI within that can then pull what their manager has said previously, what they have said previously, and then coach them through that exercise and say, hey, 6 months ago, this was really important to you, but it feels like it's maybe fallen off a little bit here. Or you've addressed these things in your assessment, but your manager has mentioned these things. So we don't want to give them necessarily advice on how to answer these questions, but what we do want to do is make sure that we're presenting them with all of the relevant information for that. Once that assessment's taken place, we have a self-assessment, a learner and a leader can have a really meaningful conversation. And then going forwards, what we can do is we can actually take that assessment information and we can start to use that to gather our sort of 360 feedbacks and start to replace those things going forward. So we can say, like, what does it look like over time? What are people saying? What are certain teams doing well? What are other teams not doing so well? So we can start to gather that. During the assessment, what we'll traditionally ask for as well is evidence in what somebody has done for their capability. So some roles for this are like incredibly easy and some roles for this are a lot more difficult. But as an example, as maybe a software engineer, we might ask them to supply like some code that they've written or a video documenting a review process that they've gone through because they have a peer-reviewed cycle. We can actually then take that interaction that they've had and we can use that interaction to educate other people of the same capability. So instead of buying content or creating bespoke content, which has like absolutely a place within the ecosystem, when we look at our 70-20-10 approach, we don't focus a whole lot on the 70. The 70 is really hard to scale and to focus. And so what we want to do at Acorn is we want to take the best bits of those people that are within that 70 and we want to scale that out. And how do we do that? People tend to not want to log into a system and upload things and create resources and spend time doing that. However, if it's part of a capability review or a performance review cycle, they're going to do it and they're going to want to showcase the best things that they have done. And using that same philosophy that I sort of mentioned earlier of what's existing within an organization already, we can then take that evidence and then use that as a training material. So all of a sudden, we now have a library of things that are highly relevant to us at our organization. They're not generic, and we're not creating them, we're just capturing them. We're just sitting in the middle and we're capturing those things and sharing them out. And so that's our interactions piece. That is sort of the final sort of step of that. The next sort of stage to that though is that we can now start to tick off things like social learning. Because once we publish that interaction to everybody, people tend to go and ask questions. And where this sort of came from our own office was our CS team were like having a conversation, they were chatting, and one of them mentioned, hey, like I had this call and I did this thing like this. And I sort of watched everybody in the office turn around and be like, oh, did you record that? Like, can I watch that? And you're sitting there going, oh, people are like more than happy to consume content. They're screaming out for learning opportunities, but they need to be really relevant and tailored to them and the organization. And they're actually doing it anyway. They're sharing it amongst themselves. So if we can start to capture those bits of what people do in their day-to-day role, we can then start to use that as their foundation for our content going forwards, which then means we have a flywheel of consistent content within the organization. Because whenever someone finds a new cool way to do something or something changes within their role, we can then share that interaction out. And now we've got a running log of content that we can leverage and pull from. The next steps for that we're working on currently is then taking those interactions and using probably most likely like generative AI and actually creating longer format courses for that. So that's not something that I'm going to demo today. I can show you the reflections coach. I can show you all of the other things to date. So that's all the stuff we've built and we've sort of got up and running within the platform. But going forwards, what we want to use is we want to use those interactions and the capability reviews as the foundation to now generate and create more formalized, longer format learning content, because we have a bank of that content within the application itself. And so essentially what this all leads to is we want to influence behavior change, and we want to change what people do in their roles. And these are the traditional steps that we see for behavior change. And instead of sort of creating a bespoke and a brand new process for all of these, we want to use the existing processes and just capture what we're currently losing. And we're having all of that talent sort of fall through the cracks. If we can take that, essentially what we can do is we've got a universal language of capability that we can talk to it to. We've got a universal proficiency layer. We can then use that to reflect. That creates our evidence by default. We don't need a new or different process for that. And then we can use that to turn it into content going forwards and actually create courses automatically. And that means that we can empower each of the team leads, branch leads, divisions, whatever it is, to create their own content by using the best bits of their best people, as opposed to needing to necessarily engage L&D or engage a third-party vendor. We can actually just use what's already there to build that as a foundation. And so I guess like the number one thing to recap on this is that your best performers are already making all of your content. Like, you don't need to engage a third party. You've probably got some fantastic leaders. Leadership courses are probably the number one thing that we see procured outside of our system. It's probably leadership and Excel are probably the two most sought after pieces of content. Your best performers are already making that content for you. They're doing that every day as part of their job. If you have a fantastic leader, if you can capture what they've done in some of their discussions, and you can capture what that leader has managed to find within the organization as a repeatable, scalable process, we can then use that to scale that out. So that content's already there. We're sort of sat on top of a gold mine, but we just need to tap it and start to access it going forwards. And that's what we're tailoring and gearing the majority of our AI features towards. There are some other AI areas that we're dealing with. So an example of that would be like reporting. So we've got the ability to pull the data into an AI, analyze the data, provide recommendations, insights, things like that. That's across the board. But where we're sort of focusing AI over the next quarter will be predominantly on these areas going forwards. Does anybody have like any questions while I'm up here? It can be about this, it can be about absolutely anything. More than happy to answer. Yeah, for sure. So there's a couple of things. The first thing that we did immediately, because we have so much government, is we didn't use any of the big models that are currently available that we can't directly host internally ourselves. So what we've done is we've used open source models. We've put those into our own segmented environment, so it doesn't go anywhere outside of our environment. And then we are going to spend the time to actually train those models and use those predominantly ourselves. So as opposed to leveraging like a ChatGPT or like a Claude as an example that we can't directly host internally, we're going to host that internally and spend the time to tailor that to our needs that we need specifically. Yeah, we just don't. I think the biggest thing for us was that we realized pretty quickly, like, it's a sensitive topic, and if we use that information, we don't really know where this thing is headed. Like, we don't really know how the AI is going to function. So as opposed to using that data as a training set of data, we use it to just as a prompting set to then surface a result. We're not using the in-system data in order to train a model, which means that we have to spend more time and train models in a different way. But currently, we wouldn't use any data to essentially train a model, which means that IP is not getting sucked in there to train it and affect the weightings within the LLM.
Even though you're talking about leveraging the people.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Our people know the arts class.
Yeah, for sure. So we can essentially, what we can do is we can take that information to provide context to the outcome that we want. And it's a different process for us to take that information and say, use this to inform a decision that's made somewhere else, and you store this within your sort of knowledge base, and then use this going forwards. So as an example of that, if we were to say, take a piece of content that worked really well, effectively that's getting turned into a prompt of, I know these things work well at my organization, please now turn that into a document or a video or whatever. It's the prompting side of it, as opposed to use this in your reference library, and that reference library is now built into the AI and accessible, and that IP has been sort of sucked up and placed within that. I think we have to be incredibly careful with that because again, like we just don't know how it's going to play out, and we're seeing like some big IP things sort of happen. I think the damage, to be honest, is like kind of already done with the majority of AI. Like they've sucked it up, they've used the training models. Who knows how this is going to play out? But for us, we don't want to take that information and use it to train. What we will do is we'll use it to inform, basically. Yeah, absolutely we have. I actually think over the next 5 to 10 years, the way we interact with any interface on our computer will be completely different. We're sort of starting to see that where we're now sort of interacting with applications on a conversational basis, which is probably the first time that that's occurred. And I think there's a couple components to that. One, sometimes conversational bases aren't as effective. So we need to be really careful for where we start to insert those. And two, we also need a lot of information in order to insert training at the right time, at the right place. That's actually probably the biggest hurdle for us there. So if we wanted to have a piece of content appear in Teams automatically, let's say, we could do that, but we would probably need to like surface your emails, your calendar, maybe some of the documents you've been working on. Once we have that information, we can then say, hey, I've noticed that you've gone back and forth on this spreadsheet about forecasting for a while, and I noticed that you've done this thing, and did you actually know there's a piece of content here that I can give you that's going to help you in this moment in time? I think the big hurdle for us is probably understanding like what's okay data for us to be able to pull through, and it's the balance of probably like privacy, early to the question that we had before, like privacy and security versus convenience. And those two things really dislike each other, because if you give us all of your calendar information and all of your data and whatnot, we can then start to surface things and know what you're doing. But then we also know what you're doing. And I think there's probably a lot of senior executive SES that probably don't want Blake to have their calendar and to be able to like surface those things and roll through. So I think over time, we'll start to find more secure and private ways that are also convenient. An example of that might be that all of that information is encrypted. It's not actually human readable at any point, but it is surfaced by the AI, and then we're able to provide those suggestions and really insert those things into like quote unquote the flow of work. But we also need some technology to start to adapt so that we have access to those mechanisms in order to get the data. And once we can get that data and that information in a secure and private way, I think absolutely what's going to end up happening is you're probably going to talk to your computer more than you like click on your computer. You'll open it up and you'll say, hey, this is what I'm looking to do today. And I'll say, cool, I'm going to spin up your PowerPoint. I'm going to spin up your Canva. Here's some learning content and courseware. Right now, we don't have the connectors in place, but I think as those connectors become available in a secure way, government's probably going to take a little bit longer than the average organization to do that. Once those are in place and underway, then yeah, for 100%. But we need sort of, the AI's ahead of the other technology that we need to support it right now. I hope that answers your question. It's quite a long-winded answer. Yeah, awesome, thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. And just the last thing that I will leave you with is that's our survey and that's our report. It's also, I think, on the website as well for us to send that through to you. So if you don't get it today, like it's around. We're going to start to consistently do that and update and review that report. It's like an awesome piece of what's happening. It is geared towards more of a global market, I will say. It's not predominantly in APAC or the Australia region, but there's some really cool stuff in there.